Hello, super friends. James here, and we have a very special treat for you today. I had the absolute pleasure of talking to author Madeleine Roux about her newest Marvel book, What If? A Loki Adventure. Um, what if Loki was worthy? It's an awesome read, especially for Marvel fans who love the dynamic that Loki has, or his presence that he's had in the kind of Marvel Cinematic Universe, and just Loki in general. She offers a very fresh take on the God of Mischief, as well as other characters. Um, some really interesting dynamics are introduced. Some very cool concepts are visualized, and yeah, I had an awesome time reading it. And to be able to talk to Madeline about it was a massive honor. So we're very proud to be able to give you this kind of insight into writing books dealing with characters that have vast histories and huge legacies. It's not an easy thing to shoulder when you're an author. There's a lot of responsibility. Um, and yeah, it was a very touching, insightful, and just a all round good nerd out. So we can't wait to share it with you. So make sure you check out the full interview now. And What If Loki Was Worthy is available to buy on hardback in all your favorite bookstores: Forbidden Planet, Waterstones, Amazon, God knows where else. And you can read it now. Find out what happens when Thor dies, what happens to the world, how many different events take different kind of course corrections. Yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, and we're super proud of this. So make sure you check it out below. One of the first questions I wanted to ask, actually, I've got the book here with me, is um how did it come about? How did this opportunity kind of land at your feet, I guess?
I ask myself those questions every day. Why do I still get to do this job? It's so cool. I feel so lucky, but I think it sort of was coming fresh off of the Critical Role book. I had just done an IP story that was uh sort of proved that I could handle a flamboyant bisexual trickster as a main character. So Lucian and Loki share some characteristics. So I think that helped. I have done a lot of IP stuff in recent years for Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars and World of Warcraft and all kinds of stuff. So um, they knew I was good for it. These timelines are very tight. You don't get a lot of time. So you have to be very motivated and stay on your deadlines and things like that. So that's part of it, just kind of proving that you're someone who's easy to work with and who gets their stuff done on time. Um, and yeah, I mean, they sort of approached me to see if I was interested, period. And there was like it was cool because I was not sure right off the bat. And then I sort of sat down with them, with the team at Marvel and the publisher, and they just had such a cool vision for this whole series, right? Like that's always sort of my test for these things. Sorry, you're gonna hear my dog. They're crazy. But that's sort of my test is like, is there a vision here? Is this just like a shameless cash grab, or are we actually trying to like make art, right? That's always what my first sort of question is. And I was just really impressed with how thought through, their whole vision was for not just this book, but the ones that are coming afterward. Um, but there's also like, it was cool that they were willing to let me weigh in and have a good amount of say in sort of like, the direction this book would take. Obviously, I had to set up things for what's to come, and that's sort of a non-negotiable. But yeah, it was a good vibe, and I liked everyone on the team right away. It was yeah, it was cool. It was like, okay, I could do this. It's I think it'll be a good use of my time, and I was really happy that they wanted to make something real, not just do some like really soulless corporate kind of thing. So
Absolutely, yeah. And what I love is just hearing about that is the kind of collaborative environment that these sort of books need, especially for something as big as Marvel or even D&D. Um, and it's just nice to know that it is fans being fans. They want to create these sorts of stories. They want to create these sort of fun experiences for audiences around the world. And I think one of the things that I think Marvel fans have always shown is this undeniable love for the god of mischief. No matter where he goes, he always finds his way back. What is it about Loki that you think entices people?
It's such a huge question. I mean, I think we love, comic books are full of pretty like heroes. You know what I mean? You've got these archetypes of really high moral standards, which are great. And we need those things, right? We need characters to look up to. But there's also something very fun about the anti-hero, or someone who's a bit more in the morally gray area. And I think in a lot of ways it's more relatable to people because not all of us are perfect, upstanding human beings 100% of the time. I think we all make mistakes. I think we're all prone. We all have weaknesses. We all have vices. So I think there's something really relatable. And I know for me coming to this project, I always get very I try to drill down on like, okay, these are huge characters, and in the case of the Asgardians, they're like based on actual, mythology. So it can feel very unwieldy, and it can feel really like that's so hard to picture. That's so unlike our lives. But for me, I see a lot of myself in Loki and sort of being, sort of the black sheep, sort of the person in the family who's like a bit of a mess, who is, color kind of colors outside of the lines a lot. And it can sort of be like, those family dynamics I think are very relatable for a lot of us, especially people who tend towards to be in nerd spaces, right? A lot of us feel like outcasts. A lot of us maybe didn't fit in necessarily when we were growing up or still or whatever. So yeah, that was like my interest in him in particular, was how do I make him feel like not only like, the character that he already is, but to tap into sort of the more relatable family dynamics and outcast dynamics that I think a lot of people can see themselves in.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always nice being able to look at these giant characters, and attaching yourself to them and finding something that you can grasp onto. Um, I think that's one of the things. I mean, one of my favorite characters in Marvel is just Thor, um,
Hmm.
and just the world around it. Kind of watching the 2011 movie really got me into Norse mythology. It got me back into reading comic books. So I love seeing all these worlds expand. And I like, well, I love how you expand on it as well. You take these characters and you offer a different perspective. You know, is it difficult adding your own sort of personal projection onto these characters, but also keeping in line with what is already established?
Yeah, I think, I my sort of approach is to just immerse myself as much as possible. That original Thor movie was, a huge touch point for me with this book. It's my favorite Thor movie. I think it's outstanding. I'm also just kind of a shameless Kenneth Branagh fangirl. So it was a lot of just watching the movies, reading the comic books, going to like old comic books, but then the newer runs as well. And Iron Man is a big part of this book, so also looking into all the different iterations of that. And so I just sort of like to look at everything that's come before and feel like I've seen a good amount of it. But then at a certain point, you also have to like leave that behind and start asking, you have to interrogate yourself and your own understanding of these characters in this world, and what do I want to do with this, because I think you get very bad IP art when it's like you're just mimicking, you're not really trying to take it anywhere, you don't have anything to say. And so I like to have a real blend where it feels very grounded in what's come before, but I personally want to do something with these characters. And I have a vision and I have like a thesis that I'm, sort of proposing through the book. And yeah, it is intimidating, I'm not gonna lie. It's always a little scary. It does feel like it escalates as my career goes on. I have some very exciting things coming up too, where it's like, you think you've hit the pinnacle when you're like, okay, page 1, chapter 1, Thor, chapter 2, Loki, like, whoa, no pressure. But then it's like more stuff falls in your lap and you're like, oh wow, okay, I have to just get over that. So yeah, there's a little bit of like, not, I wouldn't say like fake it till you make it, but a little of like, hey, they hired me for a reason and I know I can do this. I've written like 20 books. I could do one more. So yeah, but I do think having a sort of like, this is my perspective, I want to bring something to this, really helps. It really helps you sort of shake off that intimidation factor.
Oh, amazing. I mean, it's so happy for you and seeing how you've kind of developed across the years across your books and seeing you handle these new IPs, these new worlds, these new characters. I think one of my favorite things about Loki is while it is Loki's story, you bring in so many new characters, um, but also you bring in a bunch of surprising twists on relationships and bonds between characters. Loki and Valkyrie, and what was it like trying to find those sort of dynamics that would work, and ones that you wanted to kind of twist, to give something new to readers?
Yeah, I think, for me, it was sort of a gift to have Loki and Valkyrie be, one of the non-negotiables of this book was that Valkyrie also has to play a very significant role. Um, and I think when you're handed sort of this, like, well, you couldn't really have two more different people. I think maybe in some of the films it gets closer to like, oh, they're both very like jokesy, sarcastic characters, but I'm was more pulling from her comics run, which is like, she's a warrior. She's a career warrior and she has a very specific set of values. And I think having her sort of represent the more like Asgardian perspective in terms of like, well, what do we believe, what do we care about, um was a great way to sort of, have this contrast with Loki, who kind of is much more interested in himself and way less interested in sort of like, what the Asgardian, value system is going to be. He's much more fluid in that sense. And so you have like just built-in contrast between these two characters. And because he gets to Earth first, he sort of has more experience there. He sort of embraces it. He finds the things he likes and he, sits in it and enjoys it for what it is. Whereas, when you have Valkyrie being introduced to the same things, her perspective is very, very different. And so there was kind of an innate comedy to, what would she actually end up liking? What would she, what would this sort of fish out of water person who has like a very serious code of, she's highly, highly trained. She fulfills a very specific role as a Valkyrie, and she has this long legacy of triumphs and victories and adventures. It was just, it sounds hard, but then when you actually put them on the page together with that in mind of like, okay, they're very different people, this actually sort of has almost classic odd couple dynamics to it. But it's also great because there's like, it's almost harder to have an adventure story with two characters who just get along, because then there's never any tension and they're never really challenging each other. Where, all throughout this, like they hold very different ideas about things. So you can just constantly have them sort of going in on these ideas, testing each other, disagreeing. And then those like very scant moments of agreement are become very special because they're so rare. But yeah, it was great. It was a gift to be able to have them sort of test each other into into a character arc. Um, and it's good, I think because he is so chaotic, it's good to have a more sort of um not like a straightforward character, but someone who has a little more of a like very grounded perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a really surprising partnership, and like you said, there was this, a lot of pulling and a lot of tugging, but when they do come together, it's always really nice for both their characters, especially with what's going on around them. And you kind of touched up a little bit on some of the, I guess, challenges. Um, and when you're dealing with beloved characters with rich histories and with canons and stuff like that, what sort of obstacles can you sometimes be faced with?
Yeah, it's tough, it's I think it's easy to get into sort of the trap of like, oh, I have to over explain all of this. I have to somehow fill you in on 30 years of of backstory, which is not really what I'm here to do. And I think you have to really stay focused on what is the story we're telling right now about these characters, and own and being very critical and having a very like fine-tuned eye for like what details of their past are so important that you have to put them on the page, or which ones are like great and hook back into what you're doing, right? Like um this like pulling in Yarnbjorn a lot, the axe that has sort of passed back and forth between Thor and Valkyrie. That was a huge thing because, Thor sort of puts her on this quest, and to have like a physical symbol of a passing of a torch kind of thing is very useful, and it also colors in her backstory with like giving you a sense of how long she's been around and how successful she's been as a warrior. So, you know what I mean? You're sort of looking for those pieces that have come before, but that embellish and enhance what you're trying to do currently, right? Or like, Tony's backstory with his parents is a very useful thing to touch on a few times in the book because it links so closely with the journey he's going on in this and the trauma that he's already experienced, that sort of like makes colors in more for you why he would respond the way he does. But yeah, I think it's a mistake to get too bogged down in like, hey, remember when they did this, this, and this, and this, and this? It's like I'm very like, of course there are a few cameos, of course there are a few small callbacks here and there, but like most of them are incredibly intentional, and I feel very resistant to the sort of like we're just Easter egging to Easter egg to like fan service that way. That is not for me. I kind of
Yeah,
couldn't care less. Like I feel like you have to move it forward, and I'm only pulling in things that, like Warren Worthington Angel has a cameo, but like it's intentional because it's sort of like I want you to see very early on that like Tony Stark is not your friend. And, you know, these billionaire dudes are not your friends. They live a life, they may as well be aliens from outer space. They do not live the life that you and I live. And like, I need you to feel that. And so choosing him, it's not just like, oh, ha ha ha, like, look, it's a remember him. It's like, no, you need to feel this sense of like there are people operating in this world that are on a different stratosphere, right? And that like, they couldn't really be more different than someone like Jane Foster and her, her little family that she's got going. So a lot of that stuff like seems like it's just for funsies, but there's all for me, I always have to have an intention behind it. I never just want to throw something in just to do it.
absolutely. Yeah, talking of Tony, I think it was very interesting to see how different, kind of like my version of Tony Stark is compared to how you kind of craft Tony. And it was hard seeing him like that to a certain degree. Like you said, the way that he responds to things. But I think one of my favorite things is how you develop Jane. With her family, but also with her own grief, because she doesn't get a lot of time in the movies or stuff like that. So to actually have her time where you can dive more into what she's feeling inside, I think was a really good touch. Were there any characters that you really, really, really enjoyed working on?
Oh gosh. Honestly, all of them were so interesting in different ways. pretty like just like 2 months before I got brought onto this project, I actually lost my own brother.
Oh,
Very suddenly, and so I didn't know if I was going to do this because I was still in shock, and it's sort of the real, like, the depths of grief. And then here comes Marvel being like, hey, do you want to write a book about a brother killing a brother? And I was like, whoa, that's a lot to take on right now. But it ended up being a very cathartic and
yeah,
healing experience, because one of the things I got to do was really consider loss from so many different perspectives. There were days where I'm sitting in it from my sister-in-law's perspective, from my mom's perspective, from my dad, right? Like, you're sort of taking it from every angle. And that was like very, it was really interesting for me. It was very eye-opening. It was very illuminating, but I also think it gave me a very unique window into sort of all the different ways people respond to a grenade like this going off. And I think it let me tap into some really like raw and real things. So it was kind of a pleasure to get, not fun. I shouldn't say a pleasure, but you know what I mean. It was sort of like it there was something good about sitting in that, about like considering it from outside of my own perspective. I know how it made me feel, but now I have to sort of go around the table and think about how all these different people would consider, these losses. And um yeah, I think, Tony honestly was like, to me, an incredibly fun and engaging person to write, because he is like so different from me in so many ways. I just finished watching Succession, so like that was very top of mind and felt like such a perfect sort of way into him. I shamefully watch a lot of Housewives content, a lot of Bravo content. So, I have the vocabulary of the excessively wealthy and narcissistic. So that was it. And it was also very fun. It was like, okay, it's Tony if he never gets his cave moment, right? He never evolves. He's still the dirtbag playboy. He hasn't had his sort of like hero coming into his heroic moment yet, and he sort of gets it in a unique way at the end of this book. But we're staying. It's like if the first 15 minutes of Iron Man was like an hour and a half, right, where you're
yeah,
just dealing with someone who's like, oh my god, you're so self-indulgent, you're so like navel gazing, you're so short-sighted, you're so obsessive. But I don't know, like, characters like that are actually quite enjoyable to write, because they're so like, it's so specific. It's so easy in some ways to tap into that mindset because it feels so specific. Whereas, and as when it's a villain too, you kind of want it to feel larger than life. You want it to have that sort of, vicious edge to it, which I always find very enjoyable. So
I made it. It was well, hearing about kind of your, I guess, journey with trauma, I guess in a way enforced your work, but also adds a little bit of authenticity to it. And I'm glad it was kind of, I guess, helpful for you in a way. You
mhm.
know, it changed the way. Well, just hearing about that actually kind of changed the way that I view it, because now that I know that there's something a little bit more personal going on there, it makes me think back to some of the chapters, some of the dialogue that you choose, and some of the relationships, and it just makes me feel a little bit more bittersweet about them. So thank you for sharing that as well. That's very kind as well. um
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's one of those things where when something like that happens, I think our initial instinct is to like escape, like to try to not think about it, to try to run away. And it was like I didn't have a choice really. I had to go to work every day thinking about, my brother. And it was like, actually, I think it in a lot of ways like accelerated the process of getting to like a more, a place I could live with it, because it was like, no, I really did have to think about it from so many perspectives. And it made me really sensitive to it too, right? It made me take the material really seriously, even if there's funny parts in the book. It's like, no, at the end of the day, we are talking about, Thor dying, and and everything that comes afterwards. So um yeah, and you're just like you're just so fresh off of like funerals and the sort of minutia of everything that all the little weird things that happen after the fact. So yeah, and also Iron Man was my brother's favorite Avenger, so it was very cool to get to sort of be like, okay, we'll put him front and center as sort of a tribute, even if he does not acquit himself very well for a vast majority of the book, but he comes around at the end. So
It's so nice to hear, and I think he'd be proud, and
thank you.
seeing how everyone has been enjoying this what if story, and I've seen so many people talk about it, so many friends, because when you're a nerd, you know so many nerds. It's like we've all got to stick together. So when everyone's talking about the same thing, it's kind of like I guess a mini network, if you will, of just
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
enjoying the same thing. um and kind of talking about franchises, and how does it feel to be able to contribute to some of these really big, you know, we're not dealing with, small little groups of people. We're dealing with, the Critical Rollers, the Star Wars fans, the Marvel fans, um, your work is part of that now, the ethos.
Yeah, I take it really seriously. I think, books and art, it's political, and the people who get handed the microphone, it's a big deal. And I think about it a lot. I think about it a lot. What am I saying? What values am I putting forward? What do these stories do? Why do they exist? I feel very strongly about having to sort of justify the trees that get cut down to make these books, right? It can't just be to sort of like pad some CEO's wallet. I realize that you could make a lot of arguments that ethically none of us should be contributing to these things, but it is a huge microphone, and to me I think someone's going to get to do it. And if it's going to be me, then at least I know I can try to say something meaningful, and try to kind of move certain conversations forward. Or in the case of this book, I was very hopeful that anyone who sort of experienced a similar situation, or has lost someone they love, or is sort of in that pit of grief, that there's something in this that they sort of are like, oh, I see that, I know that feeling, I know what that's like. And hopefully even just the sense of shared experience is healing, or makes them feel less alone. So yeah, no, I take it very seriously. I mean, it's a lot of fun to I try to be a bummer about it, but it does it really matters. It matters to me. And I try to think very carefully about what I want to say, and how I want to do things. And um but yeah, it's a huge honor. It's really exciting, and it is very, very cool. It's very cool. I think it comes with a lot of, it's like, people, I tell them what I do, sometimes, or friends who don't know a lot about this industry, and they're like, "Oh my God, you get to just," it's like, no, it's like a keys to the kingdom situation. They're not like, here it is, here's the sandbox, do whatever you want. There's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of things you have to be mindful of. So it's very fun work. It's very exciting, but I also try to approach it with a real critical lens, and a real sense of responsibility. So
Looking kind of, you've done Marvel, loads of other books. With each book, do you learn something new, maybe about yourself or your own abilities? When you finished writing Loki and it was done and dusted and out there, what did you learn yourself?
that's a great question. This book in particular was like a really huge learning experience for me. It was one of those things where, because I was in such a sort of like unusual, like, emotionally raw state when I wrote it, When I came out the other end and I was showing it to my surviving brother was reading along and giving me a lot of feedback, and he's brilliant and was so widely read. He like turned me on to all these Beowulf translations that ended up being really inspirational. And he always he'd read a chapter and be like, "Oh, it reminds me of this book," and I'm like, "That is a really serious, much better book than this." But thank you. So he was great, and my partner was doing the same, and he's a huge Marvel head, so he was sort of the final test of whether or not it was up to snuff. But at the end of it, they were like, "This is the best thing you've done, like, period. Like so far, this is like the best book you've written." And it did sort of unlock something for me in terms of just like, I think I overthink it sometimes in other stuff I've done. I'm too worried about being like too emotional or too honest or putting too much of myself into the book. And this was like, no, I think like actually that was the wrong instinct. And the better one was to be more me and just to kind of let it rip. So I've written 2.5 books since then, and they also, I think, are subsequently getting better and better because I'm doing that. I'm just kind of turning off is this like too earnest, is this too cringe, is this too like I'm just letting it go. I'm just actually like letting myself come through more. And so it was a super valuable experience, and it was, it's always great to get good feedback from friends and family, but it has to go to an editor. It has to
Yeah.
other people have to find it useful. So to then get great feedback from the team at uh, Penguin and Marvel, it was like, "Oh, okay, like this really is something, and I really should like listen to that voice more." So, yeah, I mean, I think you can't help but get better every book anyway. Like, you can always find ways to fine tune your prose or make it tighter, make it, more funny, more pacey, right? Like there's always ways to sort of tighten things up, and I don't really think there's any way to not improve. I mean, I think there are circumstances where like you could get so famous that people won't give you good feedback and then maybe you devolve, but like if you have a good system around you and you have editors willing to like tell you when it sucks, yeah, I think you definitely improve. And I'm just seeing it, right? I just every time I work on a new project, I just am like, okay, like I something has changed. Something is new about this version of me. So, um it's exciting. It's a cool feeling, but um yeah, if your books don't improve every time, that's a problem. I should look at that. I should think about that. Have a hard think about why that might be. So
Well, the only way is up, so that's always good to know. And
let's
you
hope.
know what I love, no, I have full confidence. What I love is the amount of potential that's in the what if. I guess the what if genre is it is absolutely limitless, and there are other stories coming out.
Hmm.
Just to kind of slowly wrap things up, were there any
Sure.
sort of stories or ideas that you wanted to mess around with within the Marvel world? Any characters that you wanted to look at that you think deserve their own little spin-off?
Mm. Um, that's a great question. I hope one day I get to do like a full She-Hulk thing.
Ooh.
I'm a huge She-Hulk fan. I would love to get to be in her brain a little more. I love the X-Men. I mean, Dazzler was always sort of my favorite. But now we're getting X-Men 97, and I truly don't know if we'll be able to surpass it. So, um yeah, no, I would love to do X-Men or She-Hulk. I like Captain Marvel, but I feel like she's had a lot of um focus lately. So, I like to sort of pick up somewhere else, I think. But
That'd be a good choice. I'd very much like to see that. And you mentioned new books, and is it okay to ask what you've got in the pipeline?
So I've been doing a children's series for Dungeons and Dragons, which is super, super fun. It's all it takes place at a monster academy, so it's all like
Mhm.
their mimics and their owl bears and things like that. Um and of course our main character is a human who is like masquerading, trying to hide as in this monster academy. The third book, the final in the trilogy, comes out I don't know if it's the same in abroad, but in the States it comes out May 7th. So that's very, very soon. Dungeon Academy, Last Best Hope. And then I have books in so many so many genres. I have a romance novel. My second romance novel comes out in October. It's a Regency romance, so like, Jane Austen type stuff. That's October 22nd, I believe. And I have another young adult horror book that's my original IP as well. That'll be out next year, 2025. And then yeah, I have something I just found out about it. I can't talk about it yet, but hopefully I'll get to announce it soon. I don't know, but yeah, so I always have stuff coming out. And you can find me on social media. Instagram's probably the best for me. It's at author Roux. But yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I can't wait to see more of it. And as a fan and as a nerd, it's been really nice being able to talk to you. I quickly side note, I love your Star Wars tattoo.
Oh, thank
I've seen
you.
I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I know it was meant to be like, let's talk about Loki, but I was like, I want to see if I can just it's one of the coolest
Hey,
tattoos. It's
I'm
so
always
good.
happy to talk about Star Wars. Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Um,
it's a labor of love.
it's such a good one. It's yeah, Star Wars is my thing. So, being able to share that with someone is very, very cool. And just being able to talk to someone who helps bring characters, worlds, and ideas to life is very, very special to me. So this has been, an absolute blessing. So thank you
Of
so much for,
course.
taking the time to talk to me about Loki and just being a nerd and yeah, it's been a very, very refreshing and illuminating chat, and I do very
Yeah.
much appreciate it because I think one of the best things about these sorts of things is when they get announced, is seeing how excited people get and seeing how people respond to them. It's always really refreshing, especially when no one sees it coming. I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting a What If book, and now that it's
No, I
here,
know. Yeah, it
who knew?
surprised us. Yeah,
But
it
it's
was
I guess it's opened up like Pandora's box because now the possibilities are completely limitless. We don't have to have just the What If TV show or the comics. We now can have other forms of kind of digesting that. So very, very excited for what the future has in store for you. And if it's Star Wars related, I will 100% be there. So
very
rest
cool.
assured.
Very cool.
Um, Brilliant. Yeah, once again, thank you so much. And yeah, this has been a real, real pleasure. And yeah, I
Yeah,
can't
thank
wait.
you. This is a lot of fun.
And that was our full interview with Madeline. It was, yeah, we really hope you enjoyed it. I had a wonderful, wonderful chat, and I'm very, very grateful for the people responsible for allowing me this opportunity, but also for Madeline for taking the time to talk with me, especially since we had both just gotten sick. So yeah, it was really nice. And yeah, if you've already read the book, let us know what you thought of it. And the fun thing about the What If story is it opens up many different avenues for potential stories. And I'd love to hear what people would like to see next, which characters they'd like to see be the central focus point, or which sort of pairings I'd like to see. Loki introduces a lot of cool dynamics that you wouldn't think would work so well, and they do, but it also offers different perspectives, and that's the great thing about What If. So, off the heels of Loki, my brain is now racking these alternative scenarios that would kind of take the Marvel universe in a completely fresh direction. Um, but would love to know your thoughts. So make sure you leave them in the comments and stay tuned for more Marvel goodness, especially with Deadpool around the corner. That's going to be a huge one, and there are more books coming out. The kind of Black Panther and Captain America game. Just as Star Wars fans are, Marvel fans are also eating good. So there are a lot of surprises in store, and yeah, we're very excited to see what else is on the horizon for some of our favorite Marvel heroes and Marvel villains. So keep your eyes peeled. There's going to be some cool stuff approaching. That's for sure. So see you soon.
Thanks for watching, Super Friends. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button just down below and hit the bell so that you can get notified whenever we release brand new videos. In fact, there's 2 more waiting for you to watch right here below. So what are you waiting for? Why not click play?